Pardon me? About ready. Yeah, let's see if how the volume sounds. Does that sound fine? Okay. And we'll want to adjust the mic when you come up. We'll bring it down a little bit. So, nice to look out and see everybody. And Josh is going to tell me when we're ready. What a day. I know it. I'm delighted to have our reader tonight. I'll be able to say thank you twice. What a day. The weather has been just, Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Milwaukie Poetry Series. We have a wonderful poet tonight, Armin Tolentino, who I am going to introduce in just a few minutes. I'm Tom Hogan. I'm the coordinator of the Milwaukie Poetry Series, and I want to thank everybody. Thank you for being here to hear the reading. We appreciate it. I know that there's a lot of other things that you could be doing, and you're not. You're here appreciating poetry and supporting the poets, so thank you for being here. I want to thank you and welcome all the people that are on the live stream. So the same goes for you. Thank you very much for logging in and for being part of this. We appreciate that. There will be an opportunity to put things in the chat, so our technician does keep his eye on the chat. So if you want to put messages in there, please do that. I want to thank a number of other people as well. And the city of Milwaukie, of course. We have been supported by the city of Milwaukie from the beginning. This is our 17th season. In fact, this is the end reading of our 17th season. So we have, as you know, thank you very much. It's just, time flies, but it's just amazing. And I think you know 3 years ago we added a bonus reading. We added a bonus reading to our season, and the bonus reading is a poet who does not live in Oregon but has ties to Oregon. And so we have a poet who fits that description tonight, who has been the Clark County Poet Laureate for 3 years. So we're delighted to have him here. The Letting Library. Thanks to the Letting Library. So we are in the new Letting Library. I think some of you remember we started out in the Pond House, and great venue. And we still are at St. John the Evangelist for our First Friday programs. We were there for a little bit. And now we're here in this beautiful room. So a big thanks to the Letting Library of Milwaukie, to the Poetry Committee. We have a Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee, and two of us are here tonight, and we happen to both be standing. So, Kristen Roder back here. Thank you, Kristen, for being part of this and for handing out broadsides. I think if anybody does not have a broadside, Kristen is going to give you a broadside of one of Armin's poems. And finally, thanks to Josh Reynolds. Josh is our technician from the Willamette Falls Media Studio. Josh is a magician, actually. So he is the one that makes this all go and does the recording and gets the live stream up. And then we have a product afterwards, so which should be up in about 10 days, maybe a little less. So you'll be able to see that on the Letting Library YouTube channel. So thanks to Josh and Willamette Falls Media. I want to say just a little bit about some upcoming events. We have a First Friday program. And as you know, we are doing that. And the First Friday, the July First Friday program is going to be next Friday, which is actually the third Friday. But there's a little bit of a story about how that came about. We wanted to avoid the 4th of July holiday, so we postponed that. And it was going to be this Friday, and our venue at Milwaukie, Florida was not available, and neither was St. John the Evangelist. They had another event there. So we are going to be there the 19th at 6:30 at St. John the Evangelist, and our featured readers are going to be the winners of the contest sponsored by the Clackamas County Literary Arts Alliance. So we are very happy about that. And there will be poets there. There will also be a short story, a little bit of short story, and a little bit in the playlet category. So the contest had 4 categories this year: poetry, short story, essay, playlets. So some of the featured readers, some of the winners of that contest will be our featured readers. Then 2 weeks later, we're going to have the August First Friday, also at St. John the Evangelist, and then we'll have one in September and October, which will finish out that season. So we take August off as far as the Wednesday readings. Our next season is going to start September 11th, so we'll have an announcement out about the season next year. So we're working on that, and will be September 11th, which is the second Wednesday in September. So, delighted to have our reader here tonight. Let me introduce Armin. He is the author of the collection We Meant to Bring It Home Alive, and served, as I've said this, the Poet Laureate. He's now the Poet Laureate Emeritus for Clark County from 2021 to 2024. He earned an MFA at Rutgers University, Newark, and his writing has appeared in journals, including Righteous, Portland Magazine, and Pontoon Poetry. He says he is a phenomenal clapper, a passable ukulele player, and a bumbling but enthusiastic fisherman. So would you join me in welcoming our poet this evening, Armin Tolentino. Yeah. Oh, please silence your devices.
Unless they improve the reading. You know what I mean? Whatever makes us go better. Hey, Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Joshua, am I blowing up your levels? Oh my gosh, this is lovely. Thank y'all. 7 ways the story could end. Curled up, the girl hides in the weeds of the forest. The woodsman returns. The wolf bleeds in the forest. The girl's packing heat. The wolf flashes a 9. The firefight lights up the eaves in the forest. The girl suggests they form a prog rock ensemble. The wolf, baritone, sings lead in the forest. The woodsman loads a squirt gun with baptismal water. And the wolf preys on rosary beads in the forest. You shot my pet wolf! Then, I didn't know. The woodsman regrets. The girl grieves in the forest. The wolf hoes a square, clears the rock and debris. All day, they plant lavender seeds in the forest. There isn't a girl, no wolf, and no woodsman. Just fur and red threads beneath leaves in the forest. Thank you. Oh my gosh, Tom, so special to be here. I first moved back to Portland in 2011, and one of the first reading series I went to was the Milwaukie poetry series, and got to see, and back when it was at the Pond House, and had to walk past some angry geese that did not want me walking there. And I heard amazing poets like Paul Ann Peterson and Henry Hughes, just stunning writers. I think Elizabeth Woody I got to see in this series. And so to have, a Baker's dozen years later to get to share this lineage means a lot. So thank you all so much for having me be part of this. I got to do an interview on KBOO recently where the theme was autobiography. And I was like, why did you invite me here? And sometimes, I don't know, in the writing world, it's a lot of just word of mouth. They're like, I don't know, this dude will say yes to anything. Bring this dude on, right? I was like, I don't really write that much autobiography. But it made me think about this idea of true versus real, right? True versus real. And I don't want the facts to get in the way of the truth of a poem. And I also don't want to exploit something for the sake of it being interesting if it doesn't create truth, right? So what I will offer is I'm going to try to read some poems that I think are all true, but very few are real. And I'll try to warn you when we're getting to what I think is real, if that makes sense. Caterpillars. When we were little, we delight in the season of caterpillars. They'd crawl on the trees, and we'd scoop up a couple to wriggle in our palms or tickle our legs. When I moved away, I learned most people call them leeches. But where I was born, we had so few words, everything had to share a name or went its existence unmentioned. For example, wolf could mean pet, but also mother, or rusted machine, or tree where tired angels rest. When I first moved, believe me, there were lots of misunderstandings. I just point to things constantly. That's what I mean. You call it what? A gaggle of caterpillars could nuzzle a dead wolf down to bone in a few hours. That was great joy and relief, especially if the wolf belonged to one of us. Where I was born, love meant blind. The tea that soothes stomach ulcers, or anything you felt all the way to your pinky toes. I've been away a long time from where I was born, but every now and then, I still make mistakes. Like, I'll reminisce and share a memory of the troll we loved to rub as kids in the woods. And when I get blank stares, I just say, "Oh, I guess you had to be there." Which I've learned in my new home means connection lost, reboot. Or I've given up on trying. Or you will never know the real me. There's a story in my head that I don't know if it's true at all, because I remember it at a time when I was maybe 17 or 18, and it seems really hard to fact check it now. The story is this. There's a band from that time called Korn. Has anyone heard of this band? It starts with a K. They were very popular in the 90s and 2000s and might be popular on the revival circuit now. Allegedly, I remember reading a story pre-internet for me, that this band Korn, during one of their live shows, just started playing a new album that no one had ever heard, beginning to end, without any interludes, without explaining anything. Just like 35 minutes of just going through it. And the audacity. Imagine if you went to see a band you like and they didn't play the songs you wanted to hear. They played all new stuff you had never heard, right? This is like if you're a Beatles fan and Rubber Soul is out, but they decide to be like, hey, we're just going to do Sgt. Pepper's. Start to finish. We're going to end on this thing called A Day in the Life. That's what it would have been like. And it amazes me to hear, in my memory of this, that album was Follow the Leader, which is like their biggest album of all time, right? And that they were willing to just go for it. And again, apocryphal perhaps, maybe that question of real versus true. Is there truth to it? Does it speak to something true? And what it is for us, because we're all poets, I'm going to say us, that sometimes we don't trust the audience and we don't trust ourselves, right? So then we do all these little interlude things. Let me explain this. Let me add this because I don't think the words do their thing. And because I've seen so many incredible writers come through this space, let's see if I can do this. I'm just going to try to read a few poems without the little banter in between, without trying to explain anything, knowing that I trust you as readers and writers to hang with me. And there's a Q&A if you're like, what the hell were you talking about, Armin? Right? And I'm going to trust myself that these words meant something to me at the time, and they'll still mean something to me today. Right? So let me read a few more poems for you all. A week's pay lost at the lizard fight. You drop your roll of Friday bills on the purple one with a thick black tongue because its yellow eyes haven't shifted from its opponent. A green skink clawing the walls of the box, cold-footed gladiator wetting its corner. But when the fight ends with your pick split open, neck to rectum, organs spilt like pink confetti, you'll wander home thinking of how to win it all back. Even at 6, you'd ask your dad what could kill what? Great white or gorilla, cobra or buffalo, Neanderthal or green beret, everything eyed in potential death matches. Every day, you find yourself standing across another new monster eager to empty your torso. You'll get lost. Circle the city. Forget your way home as you dream of a box big enough to fit you in one corner and the entire world in the other. Last night, Orion. I looked up and saw Orion stalk between the cracks in the clouds. Because my car was dead midway across the Susquehanna, reckless hunter, I saw all the stars were the shattered sternums of caribou, split with his arrows. The vast tundra of heaven littered with cooling bodies. My car was frozen, as was my resolve, staring over the railing of the Haddam. I could walk south to Havre de Grace, or north to Perryville, or stand breathless above this sacred river until the bridge crumbled and emptied into the Chesapeake. Where did he dress the kill? The blind of clouds which shift to flash the sneering moon. I did what I have always done, thinking all the while, what you kill, you take with you. You never leave it to rot, even yourself. Sanctuary. Child, you can't swim, and there's no time to learn. You're terrified of sharks. You read once how they never sleep. It only takes a speck of blood to draw them by the millions. You've seen the grainy footage, rafts like this, tossed about like flecks of chum. The sea, you're certain, churns with teeth. My father was a skinny boy like you. I was never a skinny boy. I was plump with American papers, with corn syrup and cartoons, and a native tongue etched on every warhead. The nearest to sharks I came was, as a young man, I stared from the bridge down to the Susquehanna and saw the dorsal fins right on the Black River, a mayday that pleaded, "You don't have to do this." My father says the Bible teaches us that God helps those who help themselves, which is a lie. Those words, no matter the translation, appear nowhere in that book, which has plenty of lies already and doesn't need another. You have a mother who lied to get you to board this raft because she loves you. She said the sharks are only a story, when she really meant everything is a story, and some are terrible, and she doesn't know how yours ends. My father was a boy when he crossed an ocean alone. My father wet his bed years later, even deep into his fatherhood. Every time I stare at the sea, I should think of where you are. Boy in the news, nameless like all the boys in broken janelas, watching the future swallowed by waves. You and my father and all the boys who are nothing like me, because you are each strong enough to hold your breath for days straight. So when you shiver on the raft, you ask your mother for nothing, but instead bite hard on the web of your hand, even if you draw blood. The siren for sharks to circle. My father believes that the proverb which saved him, even if it's not a Bible verse, should be. That even if it's not true, it's true. You understand. We'll find sanctuary in anything. I feared sharks once too, but what I really feared was darkness. The ocean's horror is how we can't see through it. A shark's mouth is an ocean within the ocean. Once, seeking sanctuary from the malicious, scheming inside my own brain, I stood on that bridge spanning the Susquehanna, believing what we fear most might just be what will save us. Maybe you bleed yourself on the ocean of the first night of every night of your life to ring the church's bells, the gullet of a shark, the only sanctuary left that will open its doors. And I am glad I set a timer. You're like, oh man, you got 30 minutes. That's gonna be hard to fill. And it's like, oh man, even with like me truncating my banter, I got a lot of banter. Okay, I'm gonna move ahead to a few more poems here. Again, the idea of real versus true. The things I will build for our home when we marry will be misshapen, flimsy, potentially lethal. I won't recommend standing in the gazebo. The birdhouse will crush chickadee eggs, and our future children will cringe on the porch swing, their tiny bones straining the threads of the bolts. The roll-top desk, a gift for your birthday, you'll use only once and later explain you don't have time to write and don't care to anymore. And many years later, when you ask for a divorce without tears and without explanation, I won't argue, and neither of us will fight to keep the things I built. Once you strip my name from the mailbox, those things will collapse with relief. The years of expectation will have loosened all their nails. Oh, this is next. Okay, I do have to do a little bit of poetry banter here. This is a love letter to Jersey, because I'm from Jersey. That's all you need to know, I think. Jellyfish City. The school counselor called saying she's worried. At recess, my son refuses to play outside, but instead colors pictures of our house underwater, our stick figure family surrounded by circles of white. He told me they're jellyfish, she says, and I'm too embarrassed to tell her they're condoms he's seen on our sidewalk after the Johns have zipped and the ladies are paid for the night. It's my fault. The summer before, at the Jersey shore, I pulled his hand back when he reached for a slimy blob of deflated translucence. Don't touch! Adding quickly, they're jellyfish. They sting. Now they litter our block, and he thinks that someday the city will sink into ice-black ocean that haunts him through puddles, the drip of the bathtub and the smell of the Hudson working its moisture through our cracked, molding walls. Before he sleeps, he asks, when the waves come, do I think he's got muscles to swim for a lifetime? Of course, my love. We'll swim forever. I turn out the light and tuck galoshes under his bed. Ooh, this thing, I was planning to read this, and now it's even in a better form, a little broadside for you all. Let's see if y'all as poets, you change the versions around. I don't know if this version is the same version. Leaves of Grass, right? Let's see what this is. But this poem is called Watching My Son Bloom into Summer. His mossy crotch stains the shower floor green, and the drain is clogged with wet clumps of grass. My boy unfolds into fronds of fern as he slowly sheds any semblance of me. I'm losing his face through bark and branches. His hair fluffs with pollen, and his armpits secrete a nectar so cloying, his room is filled with bees. He no longer speaks, just stares out the window, lusting for sun. I lie and tell him I understand, that it's natural. But my voice is lost through miles of forest. I don't know what to get him for his birthday. I place a basket beneath his outstretched arms, and together we celebrate his falling leaves. Real versus true. So I think there was some amount of truth in those poems. But at the same time, I want to be straight up. I don't think my father, I don't think, was wetting his bed as an adult, right? I made this up for the world of this poem, and I'm not trying to pretend that the speaker is me. And I know that's a tricky balance for all of us as writers. But I just want to be honest that then the poems that I'm going to finish out with are things that speak to stuff that really happened in my life, and I just want to honor that as a reality. So I'm going to read some poems that are about child loss. And so if that affects you all in any way, please, take care of yourselves. So let me wrap up with that, and then we'll see where we go from there. Had you made it what I would have taught you? The jab is a rangefinder, the scout you deploy to close space for your cross. Count 1, jab. Count 2, right. If it never lands, it's done its job regardless. It closed the gap. Life is simply a grab bag of varied sized gaps through which you could stumble or whole body plummet if you don't learn to close them. If you always choose to jab, you'll break your hands. Your chest will break with regret. Thread and staples are gap bridgers too, as are poems, whiskey, the words, I'm sorry, a fistful of daisies plucked from the causeway. The whole of learning is knowing when to use which. Jab, thread, kiss, prayer. Prayer can bridge the gap or float above it if impossible to mend. Trust me. As a child, I prayed every night, then stopped for nearly my whole life. Today, I stare down from the cliff of that immeasurable distance between us. And before I could let myself fall, I prayed your name, and I swear, I felt your tiny fingers stroke my ear, urging me, step back, please. Because you've taught me there are chasms which I have no earthly way to close. There's nothing more to do but step back. 1, 2, and catch my breath on whatever precipice of my world appears least broken. The title of this next poem is a medical term that describes when a fetus's organs grow outside of the body. Omphalocele. She had no choice. She traded her cord for an open door to God. She traded the pool of her mother's womb for the atmosphere. My broken baby was a milkweed pod split open too soon. Her organs light as feathered seeds. When it was time, all the parts of her caught the wind, airborne, effortless as ash. Each winged tuft of her held a separate wish, none of which were hers. She carried those wishes for others. My broken baby, this body of yours was a hollowed pod, scooped out canoe, too tiny to carry everything you were. You journeyed through the amniotic into the sky to navigate the border waters that divide two worlds. Because you will land first. You sow the garden of the next world. So when your mother joins you, you'll stroke the worry from her brow. You'll say to her, rest first. Eat first. There's so much time now. Donation. Would no one want my child? Could no one use her eyes so fresh they never opened for us? The dewdrop of her liver? Couldn't it cleanse an ounce of bad blood? Ferry you safely through a poisoned night? She came to us a gift unwrapped. Her parts spilled out and cooling in the air. The doctor says no. Nothing of her is salvageable. All she can be is ash. She rests in a box I never open. There's no need. She arrived open, exposed. She kept nothing for herself, so still she gives. The ash smudged on my conscience, my second smaller beating heart. No metaphors. Your skin started flaking those final minutes I held you. I sang you a song I could not finish. The lyrics curdled in my throat. There was much more we could not finish. You were drying out in the hospital air. You were flaking away. No one asked us to leave. We could have stayed until morning. We could have stayed with you all the days it took for you to shrivel entirely and flake away. But it was finished. The song I sang was finished, no matter if I wanted it to end then and that way, cracked mid-verse and muffled with sobs. That day, which was not your birth, but the only day we could hold you, scant and lifeless, before letting you go. That day would finish as all the days before and ever. We went home without you. "5 years on. Where are we, my darling? Which corner of the sky should I train my gaze and wait for the dust of you to circle back again and wave? How cold it is, you alone circling and circling, colder than your face against my cheek, dried, your loose skin peeling against the hospital air. Isn't it windy outside your mother's womb? Isn't this world one that cools us too quickly? You, darling, curled fingers, curled arms, cradling the sack of your organs that could not withstand the whirlwind of your genes stirred up too much, such storm. A full circle to return to a day that is not your birth, but the only moment we would ever hold our own child. One day to cling to as my memories evanesce and lose shape. Today, I think you are closer, maybe just above the tree line. Today, our orbits cross again. Do you see this dull glow on Earth with both arms waving, cheering you on for the second you are once again visible and take shape in my memory? As distant as you are, if you circle back each year, it's proof something is still holding you here, that I'm still holding on. Gravity is the faith that falling one day stops. Gravity is the knowing that what turns away surely comes back, even if it's not in my lifetime. Thank you all so much. Oh my gosh. So special to be here. I think we're going to do a Q&A. Can I do a little raffle first? Is that possible? Yeah, sure. Okay. Raffle. Ordinary Bear by C.B. Bernard. It's his latest novel. C.B. Bernard is a writer that did live in Portland as far as, and many places. Now, sadly for me, is in New England, but an amazing writer. And I just picked up a few copies of this book because I loved it. And I don't need more than one copy for myself. So I'm going to give this away. And I'm going to give 2 away here, and I'm going to give 1 away virtually. But I'm going to give the YouTube folks a different prompt. Here's the thing for you all. If you are here in the audience, the Oregon Book Awards just concluded back in April. And if you can name one of the 5 Oregon Book Award finalists in poetry this last year, or their book, which I had to write down because I didn't want to screw it up, you get a copy of this. If it's awkward, like the silence is awkward and painful, I'm just going to say, talk to me later, okay? But let's see, does anyone know? And then we'll do a little head count. And you're like, ooh, pressure, poets. Yes, Stephanie Adams Santos. Stephanie Adams Santos, Dream of Jabalba, an amazing series of poems that are built off of the clock and talk about some weird dreamscapes, creepy stuff. I love it. All right, it's even harder now. You only have a quarter chance to get this right. Does anyone else have one? Okay, talk to me later. Audience, they're all raising their hands, but I'm refusing to answer, but they all know the answers. For those of you online, whoever is first to answer this prompt, is it Joshua? Joshua's watching this. Whoever's first to answer the prompt, I'm a big boxing fan. Whoever is your favorite boxer, write the name of your favorite boxer on there. I'm not talking about dogs, but if they put a dog there too, how am I going to stop? Whoever's the first for that, you get a copy. I'm going to mail it to you. If I could just DM them, is that how that works? I don't know. I'll find their info. I'll send it to them, all right? Man, this is special. Thank you all for hanging, listening. I mean, it's not usual for me to try to just read stuff straight without trying to do like explanations of stuff in between. So thank you all for letting me do something that was outside of my comfort zone. And then, I don't know, what do we do now, Tom? You know.
Let's give Armin another hand. Hey, bravo. Well, how we're going to do the Q&A is that Kristen has another mic. And so if you have a question for Armin, raise your hand. She'll bring you the mic. Here's the start over right over here. And wait for the microphone because if we do that, then we get the question as well as the answer on the recording. So that'd be great. And we'll find out the question and Armin will answer them.
Stretch.
Yeah. Right over here.
Thank you all. The mic is coming around. I appreciate that you all use microphones because this is what I've experienced at readings or events. First, microphones are scary because we don't know what they're doing, right? And it's like, oh, that's what I sound like, and that's scary. But also, it's just this sense of unknown. But if we don't use a microphone, you're going to usually do this thing. Can everyone hear me? And if they can't hear you, how are they supposed to respond? And that's sort of an awkward question, too. So thank you all for using that mic. Yes?
The poems you read tonight, are they in a book?
Some. The thing about instead of a cockfight, it's a bunch of lizards fighting each other, that's in that book. The one about the caterpillars that are really leeches, that's in that book. But a lot of things are either new and I just haven't been on Submittable for a while, or they're old and I'm like, hey, maybe this crowd would be willing to listen to those. So, writing is its own thing, and then there's a lot of ancillary things to writing, which includes submitting and publishing. And I am not in that phase right now, but I would like to get into that phase again. So we'll see.
And that last section of poems that you read,
Yeah.
are you planning on doing something with those? They were so moving.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've read them a few times live. I don't have them published. I would like to. I like how they hang together. And also, what I'm finding a lot is like, maybe you have this experience where it's like, oh, I got enough for like 5 poems. That's not a chapbook, right? So you're like, okay, how did these hang together? Where should they live in this world? So, yeah, I mean, I'll look for places to submit them perhaps online. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to have a new book out, but that takes, it's its own type of energy and work. And sometimes I'm feeling like I'm forcing stuff for the purpose of the book versus, are you a writer? And if you're a writer, then it doesn't really matter about the book, right? Like you're writing. And what does it matter if you publish or not? And I'm trying to remind myself, why am I doing this? And is it because I like that little royalty check that barely pays for a couple beers? Or do I like, what is it? Or is it sort of this pat on the back? Or is it like, how is this a life habit? And so that's where I'm really trying to go. So yeah, I'll see. But no, yeah, those things aren't out there yet.
Well, I'm going to ask you, a two-part question, really. Who do you feel influenced you? And secondly, who are you reading now?
I was getting ready for this question, and I wrote the answers down at the office, and I forgot to bring them, because it's the most pressure-packed question, right? When you all get asked, like, because you don't want to leave anyone out, and you don't want to sound trite. But I did think about it recently, because I thought it might come, and so here are my thoughts, Tom. When I started writing, as sort of writing in the way that I felt like, oh, well, this is going to be a lifetime thing, it was around middle school, which is probably the case for a lot of y'all, if not younger. Like you were young when you started doing this, and no, yeah, I know, yeah. Teal is shaking her head if you can't see that, and Teal is the exception in so many ways because she's, amazing in so many incredible ways that the rest of us mere mortals can't be. But the idea of writing and the approach to writing, I mean, so I served as poet laureate for Clark County. I would do a lot of writing workshops with people, and I would call them writing workshops. I wouldn't say they were poetry workshops, even though everyone twisted it and said, like, poetry workshop. First, when you're just free writing, you don't know what that thing is. Those are just words. You're going to have to shape that thing later. And maybe it's a poem, or maybe it's an essay, or maybe it's a short story, or maybe it's just a Facebook post, and it's all good. As long as you're writing, that's good. But when I started doing this idea of, and so at those workshops, I'd always ask, like, has anyone ever written a poem in their life? Because these aren't all poets. And have you written a poem in your life? And hands would go up. And then I would also ask, did you do it of your own volition? Was it or was it forced because of a school assignment? And almost the same number of hands would be up, right? So we all inherently have a desire and need to write. And poetry is the oldest literary art form, well before novels. So we know that there's something about it that is intrinsic to us as human beings, perhaps. And so I started writing in middle school. Really, I wanted to be Stephen King. I wanted to write these big novels. I was just blown away by what was possible and how weird and creepy. Plot is hard, man. And not only plot for, I'm not even just talking about plot for, those 500-page books he was doing, like High on Cocaine. He was doing that 500 pages on cocaine. I'm talking about, try to do 150 pages of keeping plot together. That's a lot of work. What I like doing is, putting these images together and be like, here's a fun metaphor. This sounds fun. And then being like, okay, 17 lines. I think I'm done. So that leads itself more to poetry. Why were we talking about this? Oh, influences. So I didn't read a lot of poetry growing up. I had a school education in America that maybe many did, where it's like, okay, you had a chapter on poetry. I liked the idea of writing poetry more than I wanted to read it. And eventually I wanted to try to get better at writing, so I eventually applied to a graduate program. But during that period of really forming my understanding of poetry, Lee Young Lee was critical to me. Thomas Lux, I have loved him, and I don't think people talk about him as much, but I love the weirdness and the turns of his syntax. And Lucy Brock-Broido was one of these people I found pretty early on, and if you haven't seen her work recently, just look at those line breaks. And if you're like, I don't know what a line break does, check those out. She does some remarkable work with short and long lines. Nowadays, always a lot of pressure. I am, in my bag, I have Eric Tran's, I should know how to say this. It has the words sugar, mouth, and smoke, but I can't remember the order of them. So I'll give a copy of this book, Ordinary Bear, or Eric Tran's book to anyone who corrects me on that chat, all right? Hold me to it. Which has this amazing sonnet cycle in the middle where the titles are all different types of prescription drugs. It's fascinating. I'm also reading Will Erickson's book. Will Erickson is a poet out of Vancouver, and he has a book called Pressure. You don't have to believe in the world. Really weird, absurdist kind of pieces, but with a lot of heart. A lot of them all have the title Inventions, and they're weird inventions, like an invention that kills hummingbirds or whatever. It's just weird stuff, but you can see just that tenderness within each of the pieces. So that's been something I'm reading. And then for nonfiction, Jessica Johnson, who was an Oregon Book Award finalist for poetry, also has a memoir that just came out. So I just started it, and it's about her life growing up in extremely isolated rural mining areas, and what is family, what are gender roles, and it's fascinating. So, did I get anywhere close to answering that?
Good.
Ballpark? Okay. I think Betsy's got her hand up.
We've got one here and then I'll head on over. Okay, I'll wait.
Armin, it's great, always great to hear you read. One of the things that struck me tonight is that in your poetry, there's a lot of imagery. And the way I want to characterize it is you take what's concrete and you make it abstract. How do you keep the hem in the garment? How do you go about making sure that these syntactical changes, and then how do you keep it all sewn together for one complete imagery?
Yeah, thank you for that. And so the question, if I'm hearing you right, is just sort of the idea of if there are images, how do you make them hang within a given piece? Yeah, knowing that already, I admitted I don't do plot, right? So I like the idea of story, but plot really has this cause and effect kind of thing and conclusion, which is a thing that I don't have in my toolkit. But we're all writers, and we all have different things in our toolkits, and the things we like and the things we're good at. And so you shouldn't just rely on the things that you're good at. It should also be the things you like. And so we as poets know that our toolkit tend to be even bigger than any other writer's toolkit, because you could do things in verse that you likely can't get away with in prose, right? Because once you start doing that kind of stuff, when it gets too stylized, we call that poetry, right? That's sort of the idea. And so the idea of image and starting with image, everything you write has to start from some sort of seedling. And what I would offer, just from my perspective, but it doesn't mean it's correct, is I rarely think it helps to start with the seedling of, this is a message I want to say. That's rarely a useful seedling because it doesn't end up being a poem. It becomes a lecture or a sermon versus starting with something else like sound, rhyme and meter, or starting out with image, starting out with metaphor. Any of those things I think are a better seedling from which to build a given poem. And so one thing that I've done in the past is I've been through many boring work meetings, not now because I love my job right now, right? I love my job right now. You hear that, YouTube. I've been through a lot of boring work meetings, and I don't know if you've been through a boring work meeting where you're doodling. Well, some people doodle. What I do is I like to write word pairings and just try to write them without any logic of what they mean. So, for example, I'll do an adjective and a noun pairing that have no logic. I'm just trying to see what words come out. Or a noun-verb pairing. And then I have to work my way to what would the reality of that world be. So I think one of those earlier poems I wrote was called A Week's Pay at the Lizard Fight. And that idea, first, when I first wrote it, I was picturing this like lizard man. Because first I had to try to come up with what does lizard fight mean? If lizard's the adjective and fight is the noun, what is a lizard fight? And what does it mean in my world if I'm trying to create some sort of reality for myself without worrying about what I'm trying to say? And so first, the first version I wrote about it was sort of like this sort of circus lizard man creature. And people were like, cool, but why is it called lizard fight? And it's like, you're right. So then I had to think back of what is the reality of that world. And I'm Filipino, and in the Philippines, cockfighting is a very popular sport. And even, when my dad and I talk, he lives multiple time zones away, but when we chat, it's often about boxing. And he'll say, who's your manok? Who's your manok for this fight? Manok means chicken in Tagalog. So this idea of like, okay, what is this world where instead of it chicken fighting, they're lizards fighting? And what type of like degenerate is gambling his week's pay at a bunch of lizards fighting in a box? What type of person does that? And so I'm trying to build out the reality of that for myself, and then trying to, every time you make a choice with your words, now what's nice is it shapes it, right? You're like pruning a bonsai. It's taking shape. And so I only have so many more choices once I put the next word down. And I put the next word down, and I put the next word down, until finally, I think that's the poem. And either it may not be a good poem, but that's the poem. And it's done, and I get to be done with it and move on to the next thing. So I don't know if that even came close to answering. think we're getting close to time. Oh, no? I didn't know if we were getting, I don't want to keep people or library staff here later than they have to be. I just didn't know what time. No. Tom knows what's going on.
Well, I probably don't really have a question. I just want to make comments.
I love comments.
First of all, something that was not in the introduction is the work that Armin does for paid work in the community. He's a pillar of the community, and he is a stellar reader and editor. Like, he's so well educated and so astute. So, and what I actually, I don't know if this is true, but I think what the comment was really about your ability to combine abstraction with metaphor. And that is a particular gift that not a lot of poets have, or they work their entire lifetime to try to get. I mean, it is really particular. So, and you know, I'm gonna cry now. I love your work in general, but those poems about the lost child, will be such a gift to the people that need it. Like, you know, when I got divorced, I couldn't find a single image for divorce. And then I read The Late Wife by Claudia Emerson. It was so cathartic. You are going to give people such an important experience of catharsis. So I thank you on their behalf. The Late Wife by Claudia Emerson. Anyway, so I guess I needed to say something and to honor you, but also, so I'll ask a question.
I feel honored. Thank you.
So the question would be, like, I know you know a lot about form, and you often, like, you'll approach a poem by saying, oh, this is a villanelle, and I'm like, oh, really? So do you ever start by setting yourself challenges to use form?
Absolutely, yeah.
For the audience?
Yeah. So form, if you're not familiar, is the idea that certain types of poetry were written with very specific rules to them. So sonnet is one of the most familiar forms we have, where it's supposed to be 14 lines, and it's supposed to have a rhyming scheme and a certain number of syllables. And of course, one of the fun things about that is that you choose where you break the rules or not. And that's always extremely fun. But if you're not thinking about form at all, why aren't you just writing a story? Why aren't you just writing an essay? Are you writing an essay that you're not feeling ready to put into the right shape for an essay, right? Like, what is the right shape for this thing? Because the shape matters. The idea is brilliant. Let's not stop. Like, any ideas you all have are brilliant, trust me. But if you don't know the right form, how is someone 100 miles away, 20 years later, going to understand what you're trying to say? Because they're not. You and I aren't going to be talking to all of our readers, right? This is a gift where I get to talk to you all, but that's not normally how it is. The thing you've written is going to be there somewhere, apart from you, that someone has to read and experience independent of you explaining what it's about. So I love the idea of starting with form, and Betsy knows this because I've done a lot of writing with Betsy, that I'm working on a series of poems where I'm just trying to pick what the next form I could try, and I am dying on a pantoum right now. I just cannot structurally do it, and I keep bailing out and be like, no, this is a blank verse poem, right? That would be easier, right? It's just a blank verse. And it's like, no, that's not working either. What are the parameters? And what I really love are, there are a number of poems that I've looked at now, years later, because I'm old enough to have poems I wrote years later, or years ago, and I could look at them and say, oh, I remember that was a prompt. I remember that started as a sonnet, but it doesn't look like one now. And that's a cool feeling. In that collection, we meant to bring it home alive. There was this one poem in the first third that I could not get down. And so I was like, it's good enough, right? The editor picked it up. I don't need to write it. But then when it came back to me for revision, I looked at it, I was like, I know there's a poem missing here, but I have no idea how to write it. It's too scary, it's too daunting to me. And I started as a sonnet, and now when I look at it, I don't even remember what the sonnet version looks like. It might still have some of that sonnet feel, but it just was the entryway. So when you're reading poems, one of my things that I think is valuable, not from an academic sense, but for your joy as a reader, right? Because you're doing it hopefully for fun. You're not getting paid to read poems. Or if you are, tell me what that job is. I love my job right now, but if someone knows what that job is, tell me what that job is. ABC, right? Always be counting. Just count stuff. Syllables, stresses, lines. Is there something there that you want to model? Because this world is hard enough, and writing is hard enough. Why not use some of the templates that have existed for years, for centuries? Why not fit your words into something that you know works already? You do that with everything else, right? I mean, ChatGPT is telling you how to write your work emails, so why not allow poetry forms to guide you in like, okay, because the scariest thing as a writer is that blank page, right? Imagine how many words you could put on there, and which word do you start with? Well, if you start with a form, then you know, hey, man, 14 lines, and then I get to go to the bar after that? That's not bad, right? That's a good day's work. I'm down with that. You get time for one last poem or questions?
Oh. I mean, you can go.
So I'm thinking a little bit of that caterpillars and leeches poem, and I'm thinking also of an experience I had years ago, some instruction I got from a poet, and he's led this exercise that he called unpacking your word hoard. And I liked that metaphor, and it felt very much like a weird Viking mythology of these hoards. And then he talked about the sort of paucity of language, but the richness of language. And I'm curious about your word hoard, the meaningful language of your childhood.
Oof, I love that. Word hoard, H-O-A-R-D, I think.
I interpreted it as H-O-R-D-E, but...
Oh, that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's other spellings that I don't think you mean. So like, no, I follow, absolutely. And so, yes, if first you are a poet, right? Because you clearly care about words. Because there are some writers that actually don't care that much about words, right? Like someone who's writing a self-help book might not care that much about words. They care about this idea of like, oh, here's the idea. But if you love language, you're probably a poet, right? And so the idea that there's a collection of words. And so for me, going back to that idea of like pairing random words together, I did in a free write the words gaggle and caterpillar. And so caterpillars aren't known to come together as a gaggle. I just like the sound of the word gaggle. I like the sound of gaggle and caterpillar together. And then I, again, had to write that idea of like, what's the world where the words gaggle and caterpillar are together. But the words like, so I'm a big proponent of free writing as far as just setting a timer and going through the boring mechanics of just seeing what words come out. Because if you're not scared of that, then you could probably keep on writing in some way. And words that keep coming up for me, for whatever reason, are smoke. It constantly comes up. Bone, punk, P-U-N-K, but more like, I don't usually mean it as the music, though I like the music. It's more like a smell. Like that seems to come up. They don't come up in the writing. I try to switch them out. Like the word wolf comes up all the time. It's like, you can't write about wolves all the time. Switch it out. I wrote a poem recently where I was like, oh, wolf. And it's like, nope, make it a jackal. Like, what could it hurt, right? Another syllable, it'll still hang, and it's not the same thing over and over. So I think those words have come up a lot. What I enjoyed about that poem, and I hope you all have an experience of that, where you write the poem, and the poem or anything you write has at least two lives. At least two lives. The second life is the one that we're more aware of, which are like those books out there, right? Like you pick up a book and it's like, oh, someone wrote this and this is the second life of this piece. Or maybe like you're reading it live. This is the second life of this piece. The first life of it is when you write it on paper. And that life is as important, if not more important. That feeling of writing it and being like, I think this thing is done, might feel better than you publishing something, especially because publishing takes years and whatever, right? So, for me, one of the experiences in writing that poem that I loved was this idea of like, oh, here are some weird sounds and things, but knowing as a brown man, it's really common for people to be like, oh, your language is different and weird. It's like, I'm from Jersey. My words are the same as yours. I call it, sometimes we call it water ice, but it's the same thing as like, yeah, what do we call it? Rita's, like the desserts are the same. It's the same idea, right? A hoagie or a sub, it's the same thing, but because they look at you and they're like, oh, you're not from here. They're like, oh, yeah, this must be a weird thing, where people don't realize their own words might mean all sorts of weird things to people. And so writing through that poem, I like the idea that I could just have fun with the possibility of what words can mean And I think in that word horde, I try to just let the word land in whatever writing I'm doing and then swap it out. So if I have too many wolves, I got to get a fox in there. I don't use bears, but I have this book called Ordinary Bear, which I'm giving away if anyone can name one of the 4 Oregon Book Award finalists in poetry that did not get named yet. Stephanie Adams Santos already got named. Thank you. Anything else? Was there? Oh, I did? Okay, that's right.
Yeah. I thought you did that on purpose.
I don't know how to
to
do
help.
this, man. It's scary. I'm answering questions on the spot. I don't know what I'm doing here.
So you may like this one or not. I don't know then. I'm curious as to what your relationship is to your poems. Do you love them? And, or are there poems that you learn to love?
That's a fantastic question. I mean that genuinely, because that's a real question of like, what is your relationship with this thing you created that you spent your own time on? And wouldn't it feel awful if everything you made you hated? And that's a good question of like, why are you still doing it too? I have to say, I'm pretty good at patting myself on the back, yeah.
Well, yes. And, well, oh, great. Clap, you know. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context.
Please.
While you were reading, there was one of these lines that you had, and I was like, oh, I wanted to pass out. It was so good. And I loved it so much. And my question was like, how does he celebrate his work? How do you love it?
Yeah.
And then naturally, are there parts of it you don't love after you write it? So
Yeah.
that's a little bit more context.
Right, thank you. I think they're and so thoughtful of you to listen and care that much. You know, I don't know how you all experience writing, but like there are different stages, right? And where you are in your writing life, and so seasons where you might feel really high on yourself or not. In general, if I finish a poem, I feel really proud. Like, damn, I think that's a poem. You know, especially if it's a form. And it's like, I think that's the right syllable count. Teal and I were workshopping a poem, and I thought I had written a sonnet, and it had an extra stanza, and she was able to call that out for me. But I was like, I like that stanza. I'm going to keep it in. But, you know, like, I tend to like the idea of writing where you do it with such insouciance. I learned this word insouciance from an MTV behind-the-scenes thing about Nirvana, and I think it was Moby talking about Kurt Cobain, and he said the word insouciance, and underneath it explained what that meant, because no one knew what it meant, right? And I think insouciance, if I remember right, it was sort of this carefreeness, this just having, and you could think about that, like many of you maybe had this experience. I didn't read a lot of poems growing up. I listened to music, and it's just amazing to think like you make an album. The Beatles made an album every 6 months. They came up with stuff. They figured out what to put in there. And some are amazing and some are like, okay, but they did them. Isn't that incredible? Like, you just made the thing. And so I do have that experience of like, wow, I made that thing, and I'm pleased with myself whenever I can get words down. When I look at them later and I'm like, should I read that thing here? I sometimes have thoughts about, do those hang? Is that still me? Am I writing like a whole page just for this one line that I think is cool, but that's not good enough? And I have to question that for myself. And that's what's good about writing groups, that hopefully they'll point out like where the energy is for something. Because sometimes it's like, you know, I guess one thing you could do is just submit things, and then if you just get a lot of rejections, you're like, okay, that thing's not ready, right? And I think I'd be cool with that. But I tend to, you know, there's a lot of things I wish I were good at. I wish I liked running. Like, I think like running, like I see people who run, and it's like, wow, I wish I liked something that looks that awful. I don't like running. I wished I liked the guitar enough that I could have stayed and kept on playing the guitar. But, you know, one thing, poetry, I stayed with it. I like it enough that I stayed with it, and I think I'm not trying to tie myself down to something. It's okay to change your mind. But I think I like poetry enough that I enjoy the practice of it, and I'm pleased when something's done with it in my heart, even if I don't share it out with you all.
Ah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there one more question before Armin ends with a poem? So what we're going to do is Armin's going to end with a poem. So I think we're there. You got it?
And I haven't used up all these sheets. I got one more. Empty this one. Thank you all so much. This is just so lovely to spend an incredibly hot afternoon with you all in a place where it's nice and cool, and I'm just in, it means a lot to spend time with you all. Thank you all for investing your time to be here. This last poem, the title is a word in Tagalog, a language in the Philippines, and it means like heritage or duty, or not duty, heritage or legacy. Legacy. Pamana. I need to wash my worries. I have to fold my worries. I need to sort and store my worries where I can have them at the ready, where I can find, when I need it most, the worry that matches the moment. I have to mend the worries I've had so long they've worn through to gauze. I patch worries with old worries. I refuse to throw any away. Most, I don't even know how I got. Most, I am certain, draped my mother's shoulders first. My cherished ones were sewn by the fingers of my ancestors who had nothing else to leave their children for inheritance. I need to care for my worries. I'm filled with peace when I wrap my arms around a freshly cleaned heap of my worries and string them on a length of mourning to dry. One glittering moment that I am naked of worries. I love to see them breathe in the sun. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you so much for being here. That was great. I'm very touched. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank the people that logged in too and are on YouTube. So thank you all for being here. Armin has his books back here, so they are available for sale. So please take a look at those if you would like. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you again at our First Friday programs on September 11th. Thank you for being here.